NFL season the way he ended the last one, tweeting complaints about the players kneeling during the national anthem. Meanwhile, a state of emergency has already been declared in Charlottesville ahead of the anniversary of the deadly Unite the Right rally, as the mother of the woman killed in last year's violence carries her own daughter's legacy with action.
You see something wrong, do something about it. You may not be able to fix it, but my gosh, if everybody tries to make the effort.
Land of the free, a federal judge orders a plane carrying a recently deported mother and daughter turned around. This as the government finally files a plan to reunite the 365 migrant kids still separated from their parents after missing last night's deadline. And Galaxy Quest, what started as a line at a rally could now be becoming a reality.
I said, maybe we need a new force. We'll call it the Space Force. And I was not really serious.
The administration now asking for $8 billion, I'm going to say that again, $8 billion over the next 5 years to launch the first new branch of the military since 1947. What's the goal?
It is not enough to merely have an American presence in space. We must have American dominance in space.
Oh my goodness. We begin this hour with President Trump firing off tweets about NFL players who choose to kick off the NFL preseason and the anthem protest right where they left off. Just a few moments ago, the president decided to do what he does best, distract us. And he tweeted this: the NFL players are at it again, taking a knee when they should be standing proudly for the national anthem. Numerous players from different teams wanted to show their outrage at something that most of them are unable to define. They make a fortune doing what they love. Be happy, be cool. A football game that fans are paying so much money to watch and enjoy is no place to protest. Most of that money goes to players anyway. Find another way to protest. Stand proudly for your national anthem or be suspended without pay. These are the words of the President of the United States. I'd like to say to Ivanka Trump, who loves to tweet all day long, what do you think about that? This comes after several NFL players sat out the anthem during last night's game, while others, like Malcolm Jenkins of the Super Bowl champion Eagles, he raised a fist. And Kenny Stills and Albert Wilson of the Miami Dolphins, they took a knee. We do not expect any of the NFL players to face any repercussions since the league's enforcement of anthem policy was suspended. On Thursday, the NFL reiterated its stance that it expects every player on the field to stand during the anthem. While the protests on the field over systematic oppression push forward, white supremacists, did you hear what I said? White supremacists and members of the alt-right will descend on Washington for a Unite the Right sequel this weekend. Security will be very tight, and a state of emergency has been declared for Virginia on the one-year anniversary of the deadly Charlottesville rally. Joining me now to discuss, Mark Thompson, the host of Sirius XM's Progressive Radio, Phil Rucker, the White House bureau chief for The Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst, and my friends Matt Welsh, the editor-at-large for Reason Magazine, and Tim O'Brien, the executive editor of Bloomberg Opinion and MSNBC contributor, both with me. Mark, I must go to you first. Last night, the man who started the protests, Colin Kaepernick, tweeted this: my brother, Kay Stills, continued his protest of systemic oppression tonight by taking a knee. Albert Wilson joined him in protest. Stay strong, brothers. Walk us through this, Mark. What message does this send? And we need to remind our viewers. This morning, we were going to be leading. The top story was going to be about immigration, the abomination and the fallout of the disaster that was President Trump's zero tolerance policy. Probably number two story would have been Space Force, which we cannot find anyone in the Republican Party or the military to back. Maybe number three would be Paul Manafort, Roger Stone, the Manhattan Madam. All of those stories, you know who doesn't like them? The President of the United States. So he has decided to tweet yet another wildly, I'm not going to say what it is. He's tweeted about the NFL. What do you think, Mark?
Well, that's typical Trump. That's what he's doing. As I've said before, he wants to use this to drive a wedge and exploit the midterms. And it's really exploit the midterms for his base, of course. it's really sort of a hate holiday weekend for him, because we're bookended with the anniversary of Michael Brown's untimely death and the anniversary of Charlottesville. And it just so happens I'm blessed to be here in Phoenix with the A. Philip Randolph Institute, with leaders in the civil rights movement and the labor movement, Norman Hill, Cleola Brown, and George Gresham and others, who have dedicated their lives to fighting this fight, and are saying to all of us, we need to continue. We can't give it up at all. Donald Trump himself is a racist and a white supremacist. That's all there is to it. And he needs to understand these players are not going to fear him more than the game they play. Players go out every Sunday and risk their lives, risk even brain injury. Why would they fear Donald Trump? This tweet this morning, he sounds like he's somebody's master, telling players what they should and shouldn't be doing, and even saying they can't define what it is they're talking about. These players know very well what they're talking about, and they know, but for the grace of God, they could have been a Michael Brown or Trayvon Martin or Sandra Bland or the brother Marquise, who was just killed vis-a-vis Stand Your Ground in Florida. So I'm proud of these players. The whole country's proud of these players. Donald Trump is trying to bring back an era in America that we thought we had gotten rid of. But obviously, he wants to keep it alive. And just one more thing, if I could, Stephanie.
Please.
You know, we were talking this weekend at the conference. You know, these are laborers. Many people here are from labor unions, and they work alongside their white brethren. Dr. King talked about, from the steps of Montgomery State Capitol, about the evolution or the origin, the genesis of Jim Crow, and how there's really not a lot of difference between working class whites and working class African Americans and all other people of color. But people like Donald Trump, as they did in the 60s, he talked about how they would try to draw division between the two, because lest we all come together. What if all of us, black and white and brown and red, of course we're in Arizona, what if we all came together and realized that we're all human beings, we all want to take care of our families, we all want to care for one another? What if we did that? The power that that would have. He's trying to keep the last dying gasp happening of those who are white supremacists. That's all this is about. That's all he is about. And I think we all would do well to stand up against it. Charlottesville cost the life of a young white woman. Heather Heyer is our generation's Viola Liuzzo. She lost her life simply for standing against hate. And I don't want to be a spoiler, but Spike Lee's new movie, Black Klansman, comes out today. I encourage everyone to see it. Stephanie, you and I are alike, you know, it doesn't take much for us to get the waterworks going. But he invokes Heather Heyer. And when I saw that in that movie, I shed a tear. Why should that young woman be dead? Why should her life, this is 2018. Why are people still dying for this foolishness? We've got to all stand against it. And we ought to all stand for our opposite. That means we ought to look out for the people that we're not. Whites should stand for African Americans, citizens for immigrants, rich for poor, straight for gay. Men should stand up for the rights of women. If we all do that, this will be a better place, better America. So if you want to fight back against Trump and these tweets he's sending out, everybody ought to do those things this very weekend. Care about someone, learn about another culture, learn about other people that you didn't know about before, and learn to love them.
Multiculturalism is America. What Heather Heyer stood for and lost her life for is what America is about. And I want to share what President Trump has said in the past about those who refuse to stand for the anthem. Total disrespect of our heritage, a total disrespect of everything we stand for, everything that we stand for. Matt, when Colin Kaepernick first started this, he actually went to a veteran who said a respectful way to show a sign of protest would be to take a knee. It's what you do when you're at the grave of a fallen soldier. So why is it that the president has successfully hijacked this peaceful demonstration and turned it into yet another point in this culture war that he's created, or culture war that he's inflamed? Because he loves culture wars. I mean, his whole political coalition is based on a sense of grievance that there is a cultural elite that is sneering at real American values. And the NFL has, since the days of Pete Rozelle back in the late 60s and early 70s, has traded on this sort of hyper-patriotism. They started going out and standing in the national anthem very consciously back then as a way to say, hey, we're not like those Vietnam War protesters, right? So they've been cashing in on this for a long time themselves. And so Donald Trump can say, hey, look, you people are sneering down. Everyone who's a sports fan knows old Uncle Joe at the bar who loves to shout at the TV at what those rich millionaire athletes are doing. There are some ugly aspects to that kind of vibe. And Donald Trump is the classic old man at the bar shouting at the TV and has recognized that there is a political coalition behind that. It is a shrinking political coalition in my view, but it's very effective for him in the moment with his base. This is what he likes to do. And let's keep this in mind. When he does this, he is going to cause more protests because Americans, thank God, don't like being told what they can and can't do. So he's saying this thing that he supposedly doesn't like, by talking about it, he's going to get more of it. He wants more of it. He doesn't want less of it. Strategy, and while he might be your crazy Uncle Joe at the bar, note he's drinking a Diet Coke there. Tim, put your Bloomberg hat on, because it's a two-pronged war. He is creating this cultural war, pointing the finger at these cultural elites. But it's a two-part issue here. His policies are hooking up the elites. There is no one that benefits from his policies more than corporate America and the wealthiest. When does one wake up to this strategy?
Well, you know, I think there's a lot to unbundle here. I agree with Matt that Trump is obviously embracing and helping wage a cultural war. But this goes well beyond Trump's presidency. Look into Trump's history. Trump has been race baiting and embracing racism for decades.
As was his father.
As was his father. His family's housing complexes in the outer boroughs got investigated by the Justice Department in the 1970s for discriminating against people of color. Trump, in 1989, took out a full-page ad in the New York Times condemning the Central Park assailants, alleged assailants, who were later proven innocent without a dispute. He waded into the middle of a very contentious, racially charged event because in his own heart, Trump has embraced his racism himself. He's not unable to condemn Charlottesville because he doesn't know what to do. He's not jumping into the NFL thing only because he's playing to his base. It's because Trump himself is very problematic around race. He's never disavowed David Duke. Remember during the Trump University dispute, he went after the Mexican heritage of Judge Curiel at the drop of a hat. We had birtherism with Obama. Donald Trump is the embodiment of a long tradition of racial hatred in this country that he's actually legitimized. And the danger of this moment right now is that people are focusing, I think, on the narrow aspects of this without really recognizing he's made it okay for people like, I think, Laura Ingraham to go on the air and spout racist theories.
Phil, you are in Washington, and this weekend, the Unite the Right to, that protest is taking place. Juxtapose that with what these NFL players are doing, and give us a snapshot of where the country is right now. Because to Mark's point earlier, the majority of people in America, regardless of their race or heritage, just want to live a good life, just want to take care of their families. This is not what they're focused on.
Yeah, well, Steph, there is going to be this white supremacist, white nationalist rally here in Washington, right by the White House behind me this weekend. And it's important to point out that President Trump, presidents get to use their bully pulpit how they choose. He's gone on and on and on about NFL players trying to dictate how professional athletes should behave. And he said not a word about this white supremacist demonstration that's going to be taking place in his own backyard this weekend. He's also said really nothing since Charlottesville, nothing to mark the one-year anniversary. He's had no presidential leadership about that moment that divided the country. It was probably, culturally speaking, the low point of his presidency, and he's trying to sort of brush it under the rug and forget that it ever happened. But this rally has the potential this weekend to be very ugly and very destructive, and bring out sort of the worst in America, and it'll be really a test of presidential leadership to see how Donald Trump responds and how he handles the moment.
It's a moment for the best of America to say no more of this. I do want to go back to LeBron James for just a moment and share what he said to Don Lemon last week. Because remember, that interview took place after LeBron James was announcing the school he is fully funding. And then the president took to Twitter this weekend to discuss how stupid LeBron and Don Lemon were. But here's what he said.
What I noticed over the last few months, that he's kind of used sport to kind of divide us. And that's something that I can't relate to, because I know that sport was the first time I ever was around someone white. You know, and I got an opportunity to see them and learn about them, and they got an opportunity to learn about me, and we became very good friends. And I was like, oh, wow, this is all because of sports. And sports has never been something that divides people. It's always been something that brings someone together.
Then is it unique to football? That's why the president is playing this card? Because LeBron James is right. Sport is something that does bring us together. Mark?
Well, again, I think it's timing. Football season is coming to a start. And we're less than 90 days from the midterms. Plus, he's got a chip on his shoulder about the NFL. He wanted to be an NFL owner. The USFL was a failed league that he was involved in. So we know that chip is there. And that's his insecurity, his ego, his trying to be macho. He's a very, very small man. So I think that's what it's all about. But again, I would encourage all of us. This is no time to be on the fence. And there's no time to be fooled. Dr. King said, when those who have wrinkled stomachs and didn't have enough money through wages to fill those stomachs, they ate Jim Crow, a psychological bird that told them that at least they were better off than the black man, those who were white. Donald Trump is exploiting that same principle. He's exploiting a resentment in America that actually comes, to your point, Stephanie, that actually comes from him rewarding the corporate America and rewarding the rich. African Americans are not the enemy. It is the people like Donald Trump who line their own pockets, give themselves their own tax cuts, and take care of themselves. They are the enemy. He is the enemy, not people of color, not immigrants, not African Americans, not Native Americans, not women. None of that. This is Donald Trump's own doing. He is perpetuating that, and we need to isolate that and not turn on each other.
President Trump likes to say that these athletes have the privilege of making millions. We need to remind our audience, it's a free market system. Those athletes are paid what the team owners choose to pay them. If they get paid exactly what the market bears. That's how it works. And we want to bring up Laura Ingraham again. Remember, she was the one who famously told LeBron James to shut up and dribble. I'm sure the kids of Akron, Ohio, who have the opportunity to go to his school, receive his college scholarships, are blessed and grateful that he doesn't shut up and dribble. But what got us started just 2 nights ago is when Laura Ingraham was speaking on her show, and she was talking about where the country is headed, and I want to share what she said. She said, because in some parts of the country, it does not seem like the America we know and love doesn't exist anymore. Massive demographic changes have been foisted on the American people, and they are changes that none of us ever voted for. And most of us don't like. From Virginia to California, we see stark examples of how radically, in some ways, the country has changed. Now, much of this is related to both illegal and, in some cases, legal immigration that, of course, progressives love. 24 hours passed. Laura Ingraham had plenty of time to clarify that, because you know what? On live TV, we all make mistakes. I certainly go too far sometimes. But she waited a full 24 hours. And she said what she was talking about was defending law and order. It was about open borders. So I urge you to watch what she said again, because she said legal immigration. If it's about legal immigration, that's about being a white nationalist, a racist. It's not about law and order. Matt, what is going on here?
That is a long-standing conservative point talking about the changes according to the 19...
That's not Ronald Reagan's
Of course it's not.
Party.
I mean,
That's not George Bush.
Of course, go back and watch Ronald Reagan against George H.W. Bush in the single televised presidential primary they have, talking about illegal immigration. One said we need to open the border both ways. The other one said this is a prohibition issue, not a criminality issue. Yes, of course, all of that. But I want to say that this is a growing thing that's been happening in the conservative movement for a long time, to say that the 1965 Immigration Act changed the calculus of who is coming into the country, disproportionately bringing people from Asia and Latin America, and those people don't have the exact same values that we have, and that are changing things. This has been talked about more and more and more in conservatism. Ann Coulter's made millions of dollars making arguments like this. Laura Ingraham, other people have too. Stephen Miller is in the White House he's been marinating in that and creating policies based on that insight
and the
for
party,
a long time.
Hold on, then the party of Lincoln, Phil Rucker, those who are in Washington, D.C., career Republicans, GOP leadership is fine and dandy with the voices of their party now being Stephen Miller, Ann Coulter, and Laura Ingraham. Is that what I'm hearing?
Well, Steph, this is Donald Trump's Republican Party, and so that is the voice of this party. That's exactly what President Trump campaigned on. That's what a lot of people read into Make America Great Again, his slogan. And, you know, a lot of the Republican elected officials here are pretty uncomfortable with that grievance, with those views, with that rhetoric, but they're suppressing those feelings in service to the Trump agenda. I mean, they feel like getting a tax cut is more important than speaking their conscience and their mind and their values on these sorts of issues. And so that's why you see so many Republicans in Congress, starting with House Speaker Paul Ryan and Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, you know, quiet themselves, muzzle themselves, not speak out when they feel like something the president's done has crossed a line.
Sure. So when they tell us, or when a CEO like Jamie Dimon says, focus on the policy, don't focus on the tweets, we can't, because words matter. And the economy, right, might be good, but before you can thrive, you have to feel respected and you have to respect others. I firmly believe that is what our nation is built on, and I certainly hope more of our leaders will stand up and talk about that and do something about it. Thank you all so much. We have a lot more to cover in the next hour. Up next, the prosecution in the Paul Manafort trial. See, that's something Trump doesn't want us to talk about, but this is 24-hour news. We got time. Prosecution may wrap its case today, a day after the judge apologized to them over his actions. We're going to go live to the courthouse for the latest. But first, you've got to see this clip. We just finished talking about President Trump and race relations. One of his most ardent African-American supporters, Kanye West, was on with Jimmy Kimmel last night, and Kimmel drew a comparison to another president that Yeezy's been vocal about.
You so famously and so powerfully said George Bush doesn't care about black people. It makes me wonder what makes you think that Donald Trump does, or any people at all. Why don't we take a break? We'll come back.
In just a few minutes, day 9 of the tax and bank fraud trial against Paul Manafort is set to begin. The prosecution has high hopes of resting its case today. Today's court action comes a day after Judge T.S. Ellis apologized to the prosecution, instructing jurors to put aside his criticism of Robert Mueller's team, saying, quote, "You recall yesterday I was critical of counsel for counsel's allowing witness, Mr. Welsh, to remain in the courtroom. You are to put that aside. I may, and I was probably wrong in that." The judge told the prosecution at the beginning of the trial that the expert witness, Michael Welsh, could remain in the courtroom days before his own testimony. NBC's national security and justice reporter Julia Ainsley joins me now. All right, Julia, what's on the menu today?
So today, Stephanie, the prosecution is going to call 4 witnesses, and they expect those to be their final 4. We'll see if they get through them all today, but we expect them to. 2 of those witnesses have been given immunity, meaning they probably committed charges that could be criminally prosecuted, but they've been given immunity in exchange for their cooperation. And they are interesting because of who they worked for. This is James Brennan and Dennis Ryko. They worked at the Federal Savings Bank. They gave a $16 million loan to Paul Manafort, and their boss at the time was Stephen Kalk. His name might be familiar to you because Democrats in the House have been looking into whether or not Paul Manafort was trying to exchange a quid pro quo for that loan in exchange to making Kalk Secretary of the Army. So we'll be listening a lot to their testimony today, particularly to see if they get past the loan and into that potential quid pro quo, because we just heard a little bit about that earlier in the week, but that's really kind of been a dangling thing that we haven't gotten a lot of answers to yet. So I think the jury will want to hear more about that as we move forward and tie up the loose ends on the financial crimes of Paul Manafort.
All right, Julia, you got your work cut out for you today. I want to bring in Chuck Rosenberg, a former U.S. attorney who has appeared before Judge Ellis in the past. Chuck, we talked about this earlier in the week, but things have gotten more heated between the judge and the prosecution, so much so that he had to apologize for what he has said. What's your take on all this?
It's deeply unfortunate, Stephanie. Look, there's a middle path here. When you're in trial, you're stressed, you're tired, you can be cranky, people make mistakes, all people make mistakes. But if a judge is concerned about something that counsel has done, she can call them up to the bench and she can ask them privately, out of the earshot of the jury, what are you thinking? Why didn't you follow my instructions? Or, explain to me what your theory is here for getting this piece of evidence in. It doesn't have to be in front of the jury, and that's the problem with Judge Ellis. It always tends to be sort of off the cuff in front of the jury, and the jurors listen to this and they look at it and they think the judge may have picked a side.
How do you think that these spats could be affecting the prosecution or the jury?
Well, I worry about that. Remember, it's not just the defendant who's entitled to a fair trial. Of course he is. But so is the government. Both sides are entitled to a fair trial. And for jurors, perhaps this is the first time they've ever been in a courtroom. Perhaps it's the first time they've ever served on a jury. They're picking up clues and signals from the judge. If he seems unhappy with one side, well, perhaps they think they should be too.
Really? So you think this will affect the jurors?
No, I think it could affect the jurors. That's what I worry about. In the end, I think this is a case where the government has put on lots and lots of compelling evidence. They've corroborated Mr. Gates, the main cooperator. There's documents and emails that really demonstrate the fraud. I think in the end, the government's going to be fine. I'm just telling you, Stephanie, this is what I worry about when a judge berates counsel, either side, in front of a jury.
Well, what's your biggest takeaway in the trial thus far?
I think it's going in well for the government. As I said just a moment ago, it's a compelling case. It's a document case. The documents corroborate Mr. Gates, the main cooperator. It seems to me that the government's going to be fine. Now, remember, the government needs a 12-0 unanimous jury to convict. A defendant needs a 12-0 unanimous jury to acquit. It's always possible that the defense has sort of appealed to one juror, that there's a holdout that could result in a mistrial. But I expect there'll be convictions in this case.
Well, we'll soon find out, won't we? Chuck, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Now we have to take a turn to the battle over immigration. Late Thursday, a federal judge blasting the Trump administration for deporting a mother and child who are plaintiffs in a key lawsuit on asylum restrictions. The judge ordering the plane carrying the two back to El Salvador to turn around and return to the United States while threatening to hold top government officials in contempt of court. See, that's the story that the president didn't want us talking about today, because remember, it's his zero tolerance policy that caused all of this. The lawsuit was brought on by the ACLU, and it challenges Attorney General Jeff Sessions' decision to exclude domestic and gang violence as reasons for immigrants to be granted asylum. MSNBC's Jacob Soboroff has been bravely following this story from the beginning. He joins me now. Jacob, what exactly happened in this case?
Someone blew it, basically, Steph, in the government and decided to deport this woman, Carmen. This is her pseudonym that's being used in this lawsuit, and her daughter back to El Salvador in the middle of this ACLU case challenging Jeff Sessions' restrictive rules on seeking asylum, which, by the way, we should be really clear about again. Restrict the claims you can make about domestic violence, sexual violence, and assaults by gangs. Historically, one of the main drivers of people from countries like Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. So they sent her back to El Salvador in the middle of this trial. The judge was apoplectic. If you read the court transcript, I mean, it's really hard to say anything but that. He ordered the plane turned around in the middle of the air. The plane ultimately landed in El Salvador. These folks stayed on the plane and came back to Texas, and the case is going to continue in Washington, D.C. Today.
All right, the government came out with new numbers yesterday. Give us the latest. How many children are still separated from their parents? And we have to remind our audience, this wasn't just President Trump's zero tolerance policy. His own HHS, members of the HHS told this administration, this will be damaging. Do not do this. The effects horrible. And they went ahead with it.
Yeah, so let me just clarify what we saw on the screen there. There's actually 559 kids. It's been 2 months, by the way, Steph, since I went inside that shelter in Brownsville and saw all those boys separated from their parents. 2 months after that, still 559 out of 2,551 total kids remain separated, and 365 kids have parents who have already been deported. This is the latest as of yesterday.
Okay, for those who like to say, all these kids came unaccompanied, that's not the case, correct?
No, no, absolutely not. And as a matter of fact, again, 2,551 systematically were separated from their parents at the border. We've been saying all along, by the way, that the majority of kids in the custody of HHS were unaccompanied minors that came here by themselves. It has nothing to do with the fact that the Trump administration separated over 2,500 kids from their parents, and over 500 of them remain separated to this day. So the government just late, by the way, submitted a plan to finally reunify those remaining 559, especially the 365 who have parents that have already been deported. And by the way, those 365 parents, even if they were erroneously deported, as many allege they were, are not coming back to the U.S. The kids are going to be sent home to their home countries.
What a juxtaposition, especially when you think about the fact that yesterday, Melania Trump's parents became U.S. citizens, and they were able to use the family-based migration system. That is what the president has railed against over and over, against the chain migration system, the system, family-based immigration system that Melania's parents were able to use and become citizens of the United States of America. Think about that. Jacob, thank you so much. All right, now we got to turn. Kristen Davis, better known as the Manhattan Madam, that's one title I am not looking for, is set to appear before the special counsel's grand jury. The former upscale prostitution ring manager, even that is sort of ironic, has close ties to political operative Roger Stone, and her testimony underscores how widespread the Mueller investigation has become. In a statement to NBC this morning, Stone defended Davis, writing in part, "Kristen Davis has been a friend and has worked on and off for me. She is a brilliant businesswoman who paid her debt to society and has remade her life. At the instruction of my attorneys, I have not discussed her testimony with her. I'm certain she will testify truthfully." NBC's Anna Schechter, covering this side of the story, joins me now. Anna, who is this Manhattan Madam, and how does she tie to the Mueller investigation?
Well, the Manhattan Madam, Kristen Davis, is extremely close with Roger Stone. So close, he is the godfather to her son. They're very close friends. She's also worked with him on and off since 2010.
What does work with him mean? If this woman has a career as a madam?
Great question. Secretarial work. She kept his calendar. She wrote emails. He would pace around his apartment and dictate emails to her that she would send to his associates. So a very close associate. But she says she was heavily pregnant and about to give birth August, September, October, this key hot point in the Mueller investigation, and that she doesn't know anything about Russia collusion. However, she was his secretary.
So she's saying pregnancy brain, I can't remember, I was super pregnant?
She says at the time she wasn't doing that secretarial work, but she had previously and she did subsequently. So she knows who are all his close aides. She knows his calendar. She knows his emails.
Okay, then just walk us through this, because she is appearing before a grand jury. She had an informal interview with the Mueller team last week. What does all this mean?
Well, this is moving extremely quickly. So she was called just 2 weeks ago. Her lawyer got a call from Mueller's team. She was out in California. She flew back immediately. They rushed her in to meet with a member of Mueller's team last week, then to rush to have her testify before a grand jury less than a week later. This is moving really quickly. There's a lot of energy right now around this grand jury. So she's one of at least 5 close aides. That's people who worked for Stone in a sort of assistant capacity, whether his driver, other assistants. She's one of at least 5 who have been called by Mueller's office.
Okay, now you've also got another Roger Stone associate who's subpoenaed by Mueller, and this guy's got ties to Julian Assange of WikiLeaks.
Right. This is the person who Roger Stone asked. He says he asked him to get him in touch with Julian Assange.
Who is he?
He's like a radio host, and he's a public persona. He calls himself a journalist, and
Randy Credico, that's his name?
Randy Credico, that's right.
My goodness, and what could come of this?
Well, we're seeing Robert Mueller closing in on Roger Stone, it seems. I mean, that's 6 people in Stone's inner circle. It looks like they're moving in on Roger Stone.
Moving in on Roger Stone. Gosh, so much going on. Up next, Russia's currency, the ruble, crashes after the announcement of new U.S. sanctions. Meanwhile, President Trump authorizes the doubling of some tariffs against Turkey. Money, power, politics next. And later, Vice President Pence announces a new branch of the military, the Space Force. Monica Lewinsky said it on Twitter. Every time I hear Space Force, I think ALF. But Stephen Colbert found that announcement. It reminded him of another historic out-of-this-world speech.
Stirring call to something we're already doing. Yeah, since the 1960s. In fact, Pence's speech reminds me of JFK's immortal words.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things. Not because they are easy, but to distract from Robert Mueller. Witch hunt.
Time now for Money, Power, Politics. The president tweeting this morning about the currency plunge in Turkey, authorizing a doubling of tariffs on steel and aluminum for Turkey. The lira has fallen as much as 13% against the U.S. dollar today. Meanwhile, we're watching the Russian ruble take a hit. I've had my eye on it all week long. President Putin meeting with his Security Council today to discuss the latest U.S. sanctions that set off this currency slip. Joining me now, 2 goodies, CNBC senior economics reporter Steve Leisman and executive editor at Bloomberg Opinion, my friend Tim O'Brien, still with us. Okay, Steve, this dip is after round 1. Russia could be facing more sanctions. What reaction could we expect from the Russian economy if they face round 2? Because we have to remember, while Putin is a scary guy, while they have a tremendous amount of nuclear power, their economy is piddly, is nothing compared to the United States.
Yeah, it's a very small economy and very subject, by the way, to influence from the outside because they have pretty strong imports. One thing they've done over time is reduce their foreign debt, so a little bit less exposure in that regard, but still quite a bit of it. I think the Russian economy is quite vulnerable when it comes to U.S. sanctions. And, you know, the question becomes for all of the things that Donald Trump is doing, do the ends sort of justify the means, given what he wants out of Russia? Is the kind of instability that's potentially being created both here and in Turkey, are those things that might come back ultimately and ricochet against the U.S. in terms of global financial instability?
Tim, this isn't the first time we've seen the ruble crumble under U.S. sanctions. In 2014, after the annexation of Crimea, U.S. sanctions, European sanctions caused this. Could we be escalating to that same level again?
Well, remember, though, that Russia sort of muddled through those years pretty well. The real damage they experienced after 2014 was from falling oil prices. It wasn't from U.S. sanctions. And then more recently, it appears that Russia has sold off most of its U.S. Treasury holdings, and they've been buying gold. I think they have over $450 billion now in U.S. currency reserves. So they've clearly been preparing themselves for pain. They can't weather pain indefinitely, but I doubt how long this will last. I don't think these sanctions right now, these were kicked in because there were legal remedies necessitated because Russia used chemical agents outside its border in a militarized way when they attacked this guy in the UK. Trump, the White House hasn't made a single statement on this. It was the State Department that led this action. And I don't know how long this will last. I don't think these sanctions go beyond national security sanctions Obama had already imposed on Russia years ago.
Okay, well, the sanctions that have already been put on Russia during this administration, the president had to have his hand forced by Congress. Steve, let's say we take Putin at his word when he calls this the beginnings of an economic war. What does that mean for the average American?
You know, as you said earlier, with the Russian economy being as small as it is, not a whole lot. Russia's going to continue to pump oil, as Tim suggested. That is the absolute lifeline for Russia, and it will be a significant offset, especially if the Saudis are successful at stabilizing oil prices in that $70 to $80 range. I think the question, Stephanie, going back to something I mentioned earlier, the way that all of these foreign developments affect the U.S. is potentially through global instability. And remember, in 08 and 09, the U.S. acted very much as a global stabilizer, helping Turkey, helping Europe, helping all over the world in terms of trying to get the financial system from blowing up. Donald Trump is not quite putting the U.S. in that stabilizing role anymore. He sort of shows up at the fire rather than shooting water, shooting maybe gasoline on some of the fires here. And that's okay if the U.S. economy is going to remain strong. And if these separate fires don't kind of conjoin, I hate to use the wildfire metaphor now, but you could imagine if the combination of Turkey, the combination of Russia, South Africa, some of these weaker countries, that's the reason why the market is down today. It's down a bit, but you can imagine things getting a bit worse if global financial stability becomes an issue, and that would be lapping against American shores.
Insult meet injury. Well, I think about all those market professionals who say, just look at the tax cuts, look at the deregulation, forget the president's rhetoric. What about when the president's rhetoric becomes policy? Tim, we have to ask you about Wilbur Ross, because in your recent piece, you lay out on paper all of his conflicts, and it's shocking. I mean, the greatest gift to Wilbur Ross this week was Chris Collins getting arrested, but Wilbur Ross's conflicts aren't going anywhere. Walk us through what they are and what this means for the administration. Can he stay in his position given all he's done?
Well, you know, and to build off what Steve was just saying about Trump showing up at the fire with gasoline rather than water, a lot of these issues surrounding the Trump administration, where they fall short, aren't even ideological or partisan. It's about good management. And when that issue lands on Wilbur Ross, you have someone who's a potential steward of trade policy, when we have all of these trade fires being ignited around the world, and yet he's maintained a portfolio of business interests that raise questions about whether or not he's making policy decisions in an unbiased way. He has interests in shipping companies in China that the Chinese government also has interest in, while he's also participating in trade policy decisions on China. He has interest in a company that ships steel out of South Korea, while the Trump administration decides to give South Korea a pass on steel tariffs. All of these questions raise real doubts about how independent Wilbur Ross is, but it also goes to the heart of one of the core problems of the Trump administration, which is good government and really wiping out financial conflicts of interest. And the problem in Washington is that Donald Trump himself has not taken any serious steps to limit his own financial conflicts of interest. So he has all of these people in his administration who are sort of flagrantly breaking the rules and aren't being held to account. Scott Pruitt is one, Wilbur Ross is another.
Scott Pruitt left the building. Tom Price left the building. Steve, what's your take? How is this going to unfold for Wilbur Ross?
You know, it depends on, I think Tim says it right. It's really up to the president here. Congress does not seem to be doing its constitutionally mandated oversight role when it comes to members of the administration. They're not expressing any outrage, and it depends on some level or measure of public outrage. And the reporting has been pretty good here in terms of some of those conflicts, and we'll see if the president decides that Ross becomes more of a liability than an asset.
Well, maybe we're asking too much in terms of congressional oversight, especially when those members of Congress are working on some insider trading issues and getting stock tips from one another when they sit on corporate boards. It makes it a little difficult. Steve, Tim, thank you so much. And I'm not saying everyone, but it is a wow. Up next, Vice President Pence announces the formation of a new branch of the military, the Space Force. There is plenty to mock there, of course, but are we actually falling behind in our capabilities in space? And what has to happen before it actually takes off?